interesting.
Okay, welcome back everyone to our Parsha Insights, Parshat Vayigash. We left off last week in a cliffhanger as the brothers were standing in front of Joseph, and now here we are about to see the great reveal, how Joseph reveals his identity to his brothers, and the family is brought back together. It's a very, I would say, satisfying ending. In many ways, a lot of the stories of Genesis do not have this satisfying ending. We don't quite know what happens at the end of the story in a lot of the cases, and the impact of the trauma is certainly there to stay. But here, there's something very beautiful. We're going from a place where Joseph and the brothers were fighting and couldn't get along, to a place where they're all standing around their father's deathbed, receiving their blessings. And yeah, there's still complexities there, but in terms of the emotional satisfaction, there's a lot to be said about the division and then the subsequent reconciliation and reunification that we're going to see. And what we're going to look at today is really two midrashim that may or may not be connected to each other. One speaking to the moment of Joseph's reveal, and the other speaking to a minor character who plays a major role later on in the story, and we'll take a look at that because both speak to the essential function of midrash. So let's jump right in. The beginning of chapter 45, which is not the beginning of our parasha, but you know it's been building up, and the buildup is quite intense, and the brothers are standing there, and suddenly Joseph reveals his identity. And I'm avoiding certain words because I don't want to kind of prejudge or push you in a certain direction of understanding what these words mean, because the midrash will offer a number of different interpretations. So in Hebrew, velo yachol Yosef, well, that much I understand. Joseph was not able to do what? Lehitapek. So I've left this in the translation. I have manipulated the translation on purpose, and I have not translated this word. Lehitapek. Lechol hanitzavim alav. All of his attendants, all who are standing by him. And if one could venture a guess, what does this word mean? Joseph could not, and let's just read the continuation while you think of this, and we'll come back, and like to hear your thoughts as well. Vayikra, and he called out, Joseph called out, Hotziu kol ish me'alai. Get everyone away from me. Velo amad ishito, no one was standing there. Bihitvada Yosef el achav, as Joseph yivada, from the word yodea. It's the reflexive form of the word yodea, so he became known to his brothers. So Joseph could not blank all of those who were standing near him, and he told them to get out so that he could reveal his identity. So what's the verb that's missing there?
Contain himself?
Okay, Peter said contain himself. So we're talking about an emotional outburst, that he is overflowing with these raw emotions. And so he pushes everyone away and says, get out of here so that I can what? So that I can cry freely. So that I, as the leader, right, we're understanding here, he is the leader, he's in a position of authority. Maybe he's hesitant to show these emotions. Why would he be hesitant? I mean, let's talk this through. What's the reason for, if this is the translation, which Peter, that is one of the two translations that you mentioned, is he couldn't contain himself. So
it shows his vulnerability.
Okay, so we're getting into Joseph's psychology. His vulnerability. He can't show vulnerability.
He's the higher up. He's got people around him that are below him in status, in terms of the people that are not his brothers, but the other Egyptians.
Right. So he can't show vulnerability. What else? What else? Why else would he be? Why else would he be hesitant to show?
It could be really showing the guilt of his brothers. And he may be also protecting them, because the story, of course, of what they did to him is part of the narrative.
Good, 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 good. So Joseph now is this, he is this in a power position, and anybody who hurts Joseph hurts the state. And so we have to protect Joseph, and Joseph knows this, and he knows that if he cries, his tears demonstrate the brother's guilt in a way. It's an indictment of his brothers, and he doesn't want those around him, the other Egyptian officials, he doesn't want the government to know that his brothers are guilty. I think that's Jeffrey. That's what you were saying.
That was my meaning. I might add a couple of other observations on the word lehitapek. As I was trying to relate that idea of restrain himself to the roots, and the two roots that I'm aware of are ofek, which can mean horizon,
Right.
and also afakim, which means streams. So I'm not quite sure how those could connect to the meaning of self-restraint or of restraint.
It's a great question. I'll just mention the second word that you mentioned, afikim, are like tributaries or streams, and it's a word that's close to my heart, because when I was in rabbinical school, I started a nonprofit in the United States called Afikim. That was the name of the organization, and it was intended to help smaller communities in Europe that I was working with, and we built a library in a town in Germany, and we helped support holiday programs in a few small towns in Lithuania that I became connected with. The idea that many of the resources go to the major Jewish populations, but these tributaries, these streams that come out off the river, that they're often neglected in that. So thank you for bringing back some good memories, Afiki. I'm not soliciting any donations. The organization's been closed for a number of years, so I'm safe. You're safe. You're safe when I speak about an organization that no longer exists.
Hi, Rabbi.
So hi, Cheryl.
I'm sorry to come in late, but I don't know whether this is the part that you're on, but also you're not supposed to embarrass somebody in public.
That's true.
So maybe, and cause shame upon them. So maybe that's also why he didn't want anybody around when he was going to be confronting his brothers.
Good.
As for the guilt, but also for, the kavod of them.
Good. That's tapping into the tzaddik part of Yosef, that he is doing something above and beyond or righteous to protect his tormentors. Even at this point, he hasn't reconciled with them. I think he knows that they're sincere at this point. That's why he's overcome with emotion. We would have to look at the previous chapter to look at those hints that he's looking for to make sure that they have changed. But they have, and it could be that he's protecting their dignity and doesn't want to embarrass them. Good. And Jeffrey, I don't know, etymologically, I'm not sure I could address that intelligently as to how those two words, and it could be that they are connected to the idea of horizon or streams. I'm not certain.
For
the word lehitapek, there's the word pakak, which in Hebrew is like a cork.
Oh, nice.
Something you hold together.
Nice.
So lehitapek can also be some kind of conjugation of that.
Yeah, beautiful. And the word pakak also in modern Hebrew is not just a cork, but it's a traffic jam.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it refers to intense traffic, pakakim.
He took to self-control. So it goes back again to the idea that Joseph has to be careful of what he says in front of whom.
Yeah.
The position he is, and he does not want to put himself or his brothers in a vulnerable position.
Right. I'll just also mention, and I haven't seen anybody who said this, but and it may be going off on a little bit of a limb here, because I'm not sure there's any substance to it, but there's a word lehitavek, not lehitapek, but lehitavek, which is to struggle, and that's the word, and to wrestle. And that's the word that was used with Joseph's father Jacob when he wrestles behav koimo, when he wrestles with the angel. So there's something that connotes a struggle that's happening here. So we've explored this one translation, which is a I don't want to say well, it's a common translation, which is he could not restrain himself, could not hold himself back. The other translation, which we'll get to in a few moments, is the translation of Rashi. Well, you know what? Let's wait until Rashi is the next source. So let's just read through, and then we'll see what Rashi says. This will be a little bit of a cliffhanger. We'll come to it in a moment. So the second verse, Vayiten et kolo bivchi, and he cried. Joseph called out his voice in tears. Vayishmu Mitzrayim, and all of Egypt heard it. Right? The Midrashim talk. What do you mean all of Egypt heard it? Is it just the people in the palace heard it, or did really all of Egypt feel the impact of Joseph's tears? Vayishma beit Paro, the news reached Pharaoh, reached the leader. Vayomer Yosef el achav, ani Yosef ha'od avichai. Joseph said to his brothers, one of the most beautiful moments, I think, emotional moments. I am Joseph. Is my brother? Or is my father still alive? V'lo yachlu echav la'anoto to ki nivhalu mipanav. The brothers couldn't answer them because they were, I like this translation, dumbfounded. They were speechless. They could not answer. They couldn't say anything. This is Joseph. Vayomer Yosef el achav, and then Joseph gives this beautiful speech of reconciliation. Joseph says to his brothers, Gashuna elai, come to me. Vayigashu, this is a repetition of the word. That's the name of the parasha, Vayigash, because first Judah came to him, approached Joseph with these words of just pleading for their lives. And now Joseph says, come close to me, Vayigashu, Vayomer, Ani Yosef achichem, I am Joseph, your brother. Asher machartem oti Mitzrayma, that you sold down to Egypt. Ve'ata, and now, even though they didn't sell him down to Egypt, they sold him to one group of people who sold him to another group of people who eventually brought him down to Egypt. But we see the sense of responsibility, that one is responsible for the ramifications, the repercussions of one's actions, even if they're not direct. Ve'ata, and now, al teatzvu, don't be distressed. Val yichar beinechem, and don't be angry. Don't reproach each other. Ki machartem oti hena, for you have sold me here. Ki lemichya shalachani Elohim lifnechem, because God has sent me, has sent me here. Lemichya, from the word chai, to sustain. I'm here for a good reason. Kizesh natayim harav, and then he goes on. We'll do in English. It's now been 2 years that there's been famine in the land. There are still 5 years to come, which there shall be no yield from tilling. God has sent me ahead of you to ensure your survival on earth and to save your lives in extraordinary deliverance. So it's not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, Lord of all his household and ruler over the whole land of Egypt. So good things have happened to me once I've been here. I am Joseph, a beautiful moment. Going back to that first one, any comments before we go back to this verse? The first verse. Okay, so Rashi, V'lo yachol Yosef lihitapek l'kol intim. Rashi does not say that lihitapek means to contain oneself, but Rashi says lo haya yachol lisbol. He could not suffer, he could not bear. Sheyihu Mitzrayim nitzavim alav, that the Egyptians should stand over him. V'shomim she'achav mitbaishim b'hidvado lahem, and that they could hear that his brothers were embarrassed when he divulged, when he showed them his identity. He could not bear. So what's the difference? One difference is both of them are a sense of I've had enough. Egyptians, get out of here. But the first translation, suggested by Peter and by many others, as we're going to see, is that there was this emotional overflow. He couldn't contain himself. This is different. He could not bear to have them here. He could not bear to have them remain and see the embarrassment of his brothers. Do you see the difference between the two translations?
Mhm.
One is he had his emotions reached a boiling point. That's number one. Number two is he simply couldn't tolerate to have the Egyptians there as he was about to shame his brothers by telling them the truth.
But it could be both and not either or.
Mm-hmm. It could be, how could it be both?
Well, he could be, he couldn't constrain himself as one kind of reaction, and the other reaction of not wanting to embarrass himself or others is not in conflict with the first.
Right. It could
complementary.
Could be both are contained in that one word, that at the same time although what's the cause of both? Meaning the cause of his not containing himself is the intensification of his emotions. The cause of his not wanting the Egyptians there is his consideration of his brothers. So, I mean, they're different, different motivations, but both contained within the same word, within the same action. The effect is the same. The Egyptians are gone, he's alone with his brothers.
Right.
But in one case, one could imagine, in the second case, one could imagine that Joseph is well contained, that he's not emotional at all. Maybe Joseph has no tears at this point. Maybe Joseph has cried all of his tears. In the second scenario, maybe Joseph is the ruler. Maybe he is in control. Maybe he's been planning this moment out for as long as he's been sitting on that high seat, on that throne. Joseph has been ready for this moment. He's not going to cry. But the first interpretation said absolutely not. Joseph is overwhelmed with emotion. And where is Rashi getting this from? Again, as we've said before, Rashi doesn't make things up, rarely. And Rashi will note when something is his own chidush. So Rashi will note when he learned something from his father, from his teachers. Rashi will let us know that. And
Midrash Rabbah.
Many times Rashi gets things from the Midrash. So look at the Midrash Tanchuma. And again, Rashi seeing me, just because it says Midrash Tanchuma, doesn't mean that was Rashi's Midrash. Many of the Midrashim were collected later and given different names. So we're just referring to this as a way to find it. But Rashi could have seen it in any number of collections of Midrashim, which were less structured than Midrashim we use it. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman, L'sakana gdola yarad Yosef. Joseph placed himself in a precarious position. Ein birya ba'olam makiro. Because she'im harguhu echav, because if his brothers had killed him, if they hadn't really changed, if he was wrong in his assessment of them, what did he do? He put himself alone in a room with his attempted murderers, basically, with the ones who threw him into that pit. That's a pretty dangerous scenario. That's something, if you've ever watched any movie that involves anything, you never put a gun in the hands of your enemy. And that's basically what he did, is that he sent everyone out of the room, and he had standing around him 10 plus Benjamin, 10 people who tried to kill him. You don't do that. So that's what the Midrash says. L'sakana gdola yarad Yosef. Joseph put himself in great sakana, in great danger, because if they killed him, no one would have been aware of it, because the room was empty. V'lama amar hotziu kol ish me'alai. Why did he say, send everyone out? Elakach amar Yosef. Joseph said, belibo, in his heart to himself, mutav she'ehareg v'lo avayesh et achai mipnei hamitzrim. It's better that I be killed rather than embarrass my brothers in front of the Egyptians. That's the Midrash. Why did Joseph put himself in this day? We can't ignore the fact that it's dangerous for Joseph. The brothers don't know it's him. Maybe they're just saying things. How does he know that they've really changed, that they don't hate him anymore? He knows what's happened in his life. They don't know what's happened. He doesn't know what's happened with them. He's gotten a little taste in this give and take that's happened over the last few chapters. But it's I think it's a very astute observation. Joseph is putting himself in a position of danger. And therefore, It must be that he is saying, I would rather die. I would rather they kill me than they be shamed, than be shamed by me.
But didn't he have some clue when he dealt with the brothers and all the fooling around we had with the cups and the other stuff in terms of and bringing Benjamin? He had to see what Yehuda's answer was. He had an inkling.
Yeah, Sandra, you're 100% right. Meaning, if you closely read the text, he did have an inkling. But again, an inkling is just an inkling. He hasn't established it yet, and maybe this is the only way he can really establish trust is by putting himself at their hands, at their mercy again. Maybe this is the only way he can really know. Yeah, there are indications that they care deeply about Benjamin, that they care about their father Jacob, that they wouldn't do anything to further hurt Jacob, that Jacob's well-being and welfare is their number one priority, and therefore bringing Joseph back to their father would be the greatest thing that they could do for their father. Maybe there's that. Yeah, it could be. But what we know is what we know, which is that they didn't know who Joseph was. And how do you repent? And this, Maimonides talks about, repentance being put in the same situation and making different choices. So maybe he's giving them a chance to do true repentance by putting them in a situation. Again, it's just them and him, just like at the pit. It's just them and him. Okay.
But didn't they show it already with the Benjamin and didn't they show that they repented and walked through the steps again and Judah wouldn't give up Benjamin?
Yeah, again, the indications are that they repented, but we don't have concrete proof because they don't know that it's Joseph. Maybe they still have a special hatred for him. He has seen that they are better people than when he left them off, but he has no proof. And
like he said, everything was in God's hands. It was God's,
Yeah.
to put him there and to put him in Egypt in the first place. So that's his outlook.
100%. So maybe he's believing that to the point where he knows that God is not going to allow him to be killed. Could be. Naomi has a good point talking about that they need him, that the brothers need Joseph, and maybe he's banking on that they're not going to kill him because maybe it's not as much danger as we're pointing out. It could be. That's a very good point. I want to look at let me see for a moment. We'll come back to this. We'll look at the Rabbeinu Bachya for a moment, then we'll look at some different translations of this verse. So
Bachi ibn Bakuda.
What's that? Yeah, Bachi
ibn Bakuda.
Yeah, okay. One and the same. So Joseph, it appears, so this is just a translation, it's not in Rabbeinu Bachya. It appears from this wording that the courtiers around Joseph became gradually more inclined to side with Judah in that argument, something that Joseph was not prepared to tolerate. That's why he ordered them out of his presence, calling, "Remove everyone from my presence." Subsequently, the Torah reports that he broke out crying after he was left alone with his brothers and the Egyptians heard. So this is an entirely, new sentiment that Joseph, he couldn't stand. It's not he couldn't hold himself back, but he couldn't stand to have those other people there because he sensed he was losing, that they were siding with Judah, that they wanted Joseph to forgive Judah, or they wanted him to take care of them without this emotional involvement of revealing his identity. So it's another way of looking at this word. He could not stand their presence. He could not bear their presence. Why? Because they weren't hearing the right things. Look at the translations. I put together a collection of translations. So we'll go one by one. And this is all from the Sefaria resource. There are many other translations. 2013 the Rashi Chumash by Rabbi Shraga of Silverstein, and Joseph could not tolerate all the Egyptians standing over him. Okay? And in parentheses, and witnessing his brother's shame in revealing himself to them. It doesn't say that in the verse, by the way. This is a translation. This is a commentary masquerading as a translation, because witnessing his brother's shame, right? That wasn't Rabbeinu Bachya. That was the Midrash. I would rather die than shame my brothers. So you're seeing how a midrash finds its way into a translation. The verse says nothing about the brother's shame, and yet into the translation, Joseph could not tolerate the Egyptians standing over him.
That's dangerous to have it go into the translation because other people don't have the understanding of what the Hebrew is.
Right, but you know, and as we've said before, there is no such thing as a translation without commentary. Every translation, every word choice connotes something. I mean, you can't translate this word lehitapek without picking one of the sides. Is it that he can't contain himself, or he can't tolerate their presence? Which is it? You have to choose a translation, which means you have to choose a commentary. Okay, Rav Hirsch. He could not nicht länger lonnte Joseph alle der ihn stehne halber an sich halten. He couldn't tolerate those who were around him. He couldn't tolerate those who were around him. But look at the JPS in 1917. Then Joseph couldn't refrain himself before all those who stood about him. That's an entirely different notion. What is refrain himself? Well,
Control the self.
We probably would use a different word, not refrain, but maybe restrain. And fortunately, there's a more modern version of JPS, which did exactly that. He couldn't restrain himself. Very different than not tolerating he couldn't restrain himself before, not he couldn't tolerate those who were standing there. The Matsuda, 2009, he couldn't contain his emotions, right? Couldn't restrain himself, couldn't contain his emotions. He cried out. We're getting into more modern language, right? In 1831, French translation, se contenir. He couldn't contain himself. He couldn't contain himself before all those who were found right there with him. Okay, so we're seeing, and we could go on and on with, 40, 50, 60 different translations, and you'll basically see a very clear divide in the translations. That some will say he couldn't tolerate the presence of the Egyptians, and others will say he couldn't control his emotions. He shouldn't contain his emotions, right? Which is why in the translation up here, I just said lehitapek. He could no longer lehitapek, because choose your path. He could not control himself before all of his attendants, or he could not tolerate all of his attendants, or bear all of his attendants. Okay? Any thoughts before we move on?
I think it's both also.
I think it's a combination of both. Yeah, they're both compelling. It's very. I agree. I agree with
I
that.
think of it as like when you're giving birth, you don't want your work people around you.
Mm-hmm.
This was a moment like that. I mean, it was a very deep moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Meeting his brothers, finding his father was alive after 20 years. He just, that's like an overwhelming moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's both. And he didn't want, whatever. He didn't want the work people around there.
I think he didn't want the work people around there because of the emotions, do you think?
Right. It was such like giving birth, for instance.
Right. Okay.
Deep as that.
I think there also might be, there's a sibling dynamic. When one hangs out with their siblings or childhood friends, you can be a different person. One can be a person maybe that's more familiar to oneself. One can drop the role and really just be oneself in some ways. And maybe in order to embrace being Joseph, being the brother, he couldn't have the Egyptians there. He couldn't have his subjects there. Yeah, Naomi said it's a private moment. Yeah. Yeah, good. 100%. Okay, let's go on. There's one more quick midrash on this a subject. The Midrash Lekach Tov says Joseph could not lihitapek, lihitchazek. What's lihitchazek?
Make strong, hit pile, to make oneself strong.
Yeah, to be strengthened. He lost his strength. Right? He lost his ability, again, probably his ability to control himself. And why? Me'olam avotenu rachmanim hem, which I would translate in this context that our ancestors are sensitive. Our patriarchs, our matriarchs were sensitive. Rachmanim, merciful, but that they were deeply emotional. They were deeply sensitive. And that,
What century is this Midrash Lekach Tov? The same as Midrash Rabbah?
I don't know.
Would be
And
similar to
again,
Midrash Rabbah?
telling us what century a Midrash is doesn't tell us the story of the Midrash, because the Midrashim are compilations. And it's not, there are no Midrashim that were really authored in one particular time.
No, I'm aware of that.
We can say that Midrash came from the 9th century or from the 11th century or from the 13th century, but that doesn't really tell us when the Midrash was written, just when that compilation was written. Genesis 46, and so now we are traveling, and Jacob has been informed. They pack up their entire household that was in the land of Israel. And they all come down to Egypt. Yaakov v'chol zaro ito, Jacob, all of his offspring. Banav uvnei banav ito, benotav uvnot banav, v'chol zaro, grandchildren, hevi ito Mitzrayma, he brought with him to Egypt. Okay, so Jacob is coming down, and then it goes through a list of who's coming there. What are the names of the people? Uvnei Asher, it says, and the children of Asher were Yimna and Yishva and Yishvi. That may have been confusing, calling them to dinner. Yishva and Yishvi, and Vria and then Serach Achotam. Very unusual. When the Torah gives the name of a daughter, of a granddaughter of Jacob, that's very unusual. We know of one other woman in the family, that's Dinah, Serach's aunt. And then Bnei Vria, Chever uMalkiel, and Bria's children were Chever and Malkiel. So you have just this, it stands out, and the Midrash is going to note this. This could be a whole separate class. And I'm sure we've taught at some point or another about who Serach was, but I want to look at one Midrash that tells us, when Serach is there, she's mentioned for a reason, and what role. And you may be familiar with the story of Serach, but we're going to look at it inside right now in these last moments together.
Rabbi, but
Yeah.
aren't her Heber and Malchiel also grandchildren, or I don't understand? Beriah's
Malkiel are Beriah's children that were born at the time of going from Canaan, from Israel to, so they would be Asher's grandchildren. They would be Jacob's great-grandchildren.
But Serach was Jacob's granddaughter.
Granddaughter, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. If they would all be standing in front of us, I wouldn't know who's what generation, because the ages they're very helpful charts that we could study on another occasion as to who was born when, because you have the generations don't always neatly align. It's not like all the children were born between these years and then there was a gap while they grew up and got married and then these children were born, but you have grandchildren and children who are similar in age. The gap between Reuven and Benjamin, Reuven's children would have been around the age of their uncle Benjamin. So there's a lot there. Anyway, Asher's daughter Serach. So Sefer HaYashar says V'yachol Yosef Tzavotam Mitzrayma. Jason, we'll look at this in the English. When Joseph had finished giving them his orders, he turned and went back into Egypt, and the sons of Jacob went to the land of Canaan in joy and happiness to their father. And b'simcha uvetova, they went with joy and happiness to their father. We're going to tell him this amazing news. Vayavo ad gvul. I said we're going to read it in English, but I can't stay away from the Hebrew. I apologize for those who love the English language, but we're reading this in the original. Well, I love the English language also. It's been good to me. Vayavo al gvul haaretz. They came to the border of the land. Vayomru ish el re'ehu, and they said to each other, Mana seba davar hazel lifnei avinu. We need a plan. We need to figure out how to break this news to our father. Why? Ki im navo elav pitom. Because if we come to him suddenly, v'naged lo hadavar, we tell him, Abba, Yosef's alive. V'yivahel ma'od midabrenu. He's going to get very excited and agitated by our speech. V'lo yovel lishmo elenu. He's not going to be able to listen to us. We need to. He's going to say we're lying. Maybe he'll be in shock. Maybe it's going to be dangerous for who knows. But they have this sense that we don't want to give him this shocking, jarring news. It's not going to be good. Vayelchu lahem ad kirbam al batehem, and they went until they were close. Vayimtzu et Serach bat Asher, Asher yotzeit likratam. And the brothers came back and they saw, look, Asher's daughter, Serach, here she's coming. Isn't she cute? Isn't she adorable? Isn't she lovable? Isn't she amazing? Serach. Who doesn't like Serach? V'hanara tova ad ma'od. She was a wonderful girl. V'chachma, and she was smart. V'yodat l'nagen b'chinor. And as an extra benefit, she plays the harp. Who doesn't love a little girl who can play the harp? Vayikru eleha vatavo alehem, and they called her vatishak lehem, and they embraced her, and vayikhu her. This is her uncles and her father. Vayikhuha vayitnu la kinur echad lemor, and they gave her a harp, and they said to her, Boi na lifnei avinu. Go to your Saba, go to your grandfather, go to our father. V'yashavt lefanav, and you're going to sit in front of him. V'hach b'kinor, and you're going to play the harp. V'dibart v'amart kedvarim ha'ela lefanav, and you're going to speak these following things. Vayetzavota lalechet el beitam, and vaytikach hakinor. So she went to their house, and she took the harp. Vatemaher vatelech lifnehem vateshev etzel Yaakov, and she sat before Jacob with the harp. Vatetiv hakinor, and she played beautifully on the harp. Vatinagain tomar benoam dvareha, and she spoke in a most pleasant, beautiful way. Yosef dodi chai. Joseph, my uncle, is alive. My uncle whom I've never met. My uncle Joseph is alive. Chayhu. V'chihu moshel b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, and he is ruling over the entire land of Egypt. V'lo mate, and he did not die. Vatosef vatanagen, and she continued to play. Vatadaber kedvarim ha'ela, and saying these kinds of things. Vayishma Yaakov et dvareha vaye'arev lo, and Jacob heard what she was saying, and it was very pleasing to him. Vayishma od b'dibra, sing me that song again, play it again and again and again. I like that song. My son is still alive. Your uncle Joseph is still alive. Play it again and again. And he did, but pamim v'shalosh, twice, 3 times. Vatavo hasimcha b'lev Yaakov, and Jacob, the happiness emerged in his heart. Minoam dvareha, from the beauty and from the pleasantness of her words. Vatahi alav ruach Elokim. We spoke about this, I believe, last time, that the Spirit of God was on him. This is how the Spirit of God was restored in Jacob. Vayeda ki dvareha nechona, and he knew that what she was saying was true. Vayivarech Yaakov et Serach, and he blessed her. B'dabraha dvarim ha'ela lefanav vayomer ela, and he blessed her with the words, Biti al yimshol mavet bach. May death have no dominion over you. May death not rule over you. Ad olam, forever. Ki hechieta et ruchi. Ki hechiet et ruchi. Because you have revived my spirit. That's a beautiful blessing he gave to his granddaughter. Called her BT, my daughter, my granddaughter. May death have no dominion over you forever, because you have revived my spirit. And that's essentially the end of this section of the Midrash. It's Serach becomes a character we will see in the Midrashim. She lives on in the Midrashim for another few generations, and even is there in Egypt, with the children of Israel are in Egypt. She's the one who knows the location of Joseph's bones. She points it out as they're ready to leave Egypt and take the bones out of Egypt and for burial in the land of Israel. She's the one who knows the location. She knows, she carries with her the memories. She was the one who generations later is still around and still able to tell those stories. But all of this whole legend of Serach, and we're not going to look at any other. I took it out of the source sheet. It was a bit too much, even for me. It was a bit too much. There's some long midrashim which describe who Serach was, but all of this coming from what? The midrash gets all of this from what? From these words, and Serach, their sister. None of this is in the text. None of this story is in the Torah. What's in the Torah is a hint. The children of Asher are Yimna and Yishva and Yishvi and Vriya and their sister Serach. Whoa. And if you're mentioning Dinah, for example, amongst the children of Jacob, I know why she's mentioned because there's a whole story. It's there for a reason. But you're mentioning Serach. Why is Serach here? And so the sages in the Midrash say there has to be a reason that Serach is there. And you know what she's there for? She's there to accomplish the one thing that the brothers have to accomplish and they can't accomplish, which is tell their father that Joseph is still alive, which is to break the news to their father. Maybe they were concerned about his cardiac health. Maybe they were concerned about his believing them and their believability in his eyes, because after all, weren't they the ones who told him that, who came back and brought the bloody cloak to him? Weren't they the ones who told him that great lie so many years ago? So how can they now tell him that he's alive? Maybe they need somebody else to deliver that information. Who was that? It was Serach. It was Serach, the niece, or the daughter of Asher, and the niece of all of the other tribes. And that's a function of the Midrash also, which is to note these anomalies in the text. The mentioning of a daughter is an anomaly in the book of Genesis. Amongst the every woman who's mentioned essentially is there for a reason. When we read about Bethuel's daughter Rivka, Rebecca, we know why she's there, because she's going to marry Isaac, but she's the only daughter mentioned. When we read about the other, we know why they're there. Serach, why is she there? She doesn't play a role in the story. So the Midrash creates the story in which she plays a very important role as the one who can give the news in the best way, with all of her pleasantness and all of the beauty and all the musicality that she brings with her. Have
you ever heard anybody named Sarah?
I've
never heard in Israel.
I have not heard this name Serach. No. It's a beautiful story, but I haven't heard that.
Because she's laid out in a positive way, so you would think that would be used even in modern Israel. I haven't heard.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. That. Any questions or comments?
I just find that it's very interesting. I mean, the whole story is beautiful, but like a harp and the whole business. I mean, how in the world did that all? How in the world did they think of such things? I mean, really? I mean, I don't know. I guess maybe the harp was an instrument that they played a lot then at that time. But I mean, they don't mention her age. They don't mention her relationship with her grandfather. I don't know how they made this whole story. It's quite interesting.
It's a fascinating story / legend. You know, one of the rules of studying the Torah is that when something's in the Torah, we can ask a lot of questions about it. You can ask how it happened. You know, if there's a story, I'm just trying to think of any of the stories of the Torah. The story of the flood, we were allowed to ask logistical questions. How did he build that? How did he, how did he build the ark? How did the animals fit? We're allowed to ask certain questions. But in the Midrash, logistics aren't as important. Where did she get the harp from? Where did she, how did she learn? Who taught her? What was her relationship with her grandfather before this? How many other grandchildren were there? How many granddaughters are not mentioned? She's one of how many? We can count the grandsons, but how many granddaughters? Where was she in the birth order? She's mentioned last, but that's normal for a girl. Was she the eldest? Was she the youngest? What did her siblings think about this? all good questions, but we're not going to find answers for them. Certainly not today. The Midrash is meant to bring color to the biblical text and explain some anomalies, including why her name is mentioned when it's unusual for a woman's name to be mentioned.
Rabbi, is she the one that because of her marriage, she was allowed to enter Eretz Israel after the 40 years of wandering?
I believe there is a midrash to that effect. Yes, Alice, I believe you're recalling that correctly. I did not see that in preparing for today, but I believe that you're remembering correctly. Yeah.
It seems to be such a beautiful way to break bad news or to break news to somebody with music. It doesn't have to be a harp, but music soothes the soul, and you could see that midrash. You could see it working with Joseph. Right. Transporting him and just alleviating the shock. I think it's a great story.
Yeah, agreed.
Modern day version would be a TikTok from your granddaughter.
Yes. Very good. Very good. I think also it shows great sensitivity by the brothers, because if I were in their position, if I were in their situation, what would I want? I want this news for myself. I want to be the one who tells Yaakov this. When you have good news, you race to share it. You want to be the one to deliver it. But they say, wait a second, that may not be the most effective or efficient way to accomplish what we need, which is to get our father to come with us, which is to get our family back together. Maybe there's another way. Look, here's Serach presenting herself as the deliverer, as the Tom Brokaw of that generation. She's going to sit there and deliver news in a way that's palatable and believable. The Walter Cronkite.
Mhm.
Eleanor.
Rabbi, I wonder if you could say something about, we hear with Jacob, who accepts Joseph's demise so fast. Okay, he's dead. And now he accepts his living so quickly. And I'm wondering why the Torah or the Midrash or why nothing is said about how Jacob is feeling. How come? How come you haven't contacted me, or any of the questions that Jacob could have? We don't get to hear or know or figure out any of that.
You're right. We don't get an insight into the inner life of Jacob as all of this turmoil is happening. It must have been, of course, devastating to discover the bloody cloak. It must have been conflicting emotions to know that his own children had tricked him, and that there was such animosity between the brothers. There was to the point of shedding blood. There must be a lot happening in Jacob's inner life that you're right, we're not privy to. You're 100% right. But that we could write our own midrash and describe, an activity, an exercise in writing midrash would be writing a journal or a diary in Jacob's hand. And what's he feeling in all of this? Dear diary, today, my children, my granddaughter sang the most amazing song to me. There's a lot to explore there. You're 100% right, but we don't have that insight.
And Rabbi, what you've taught me in these sessions this year and during the pandemic is that life in the Bible, or what I call the Bible, is as complicated as life in our lives today. And I'm shocked. I thought the Bible was perfect. They did everything right. Everything went well. And all, it's not the way it is. And
Susan,
you're showing us.
Thank you for pointing that out. I very much appreciate that. And I think that's very true, that the Torah, whether it's complicated or not, it's at very core, it's relatable, because it looks like our own lives in certain ways. Not everything, really nothing comes easy to these folks, and even the people who we place on a pedestal and we say that they are the most righteous and the holiest, they have problems at home that they have to work through, and nothing comes easy to them, whether it's having children or marital bliss or whatever it is. It takes a lot of work, and we're learning from their mistakes as much as we're learning from their model of success. That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, we're going to close now. Just a bit of housekeeping just for a moment. We will meet next week, and then we'll take a 2-week break at the end of December, beginning of January, and we'll come back in mid-January to study together. And we'll see everyone, please God, next week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your participation and attention, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Shalom, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you.